asked me, "So how do you make a living?" I said I breathe deep, eat slow, and thank my food before I eat it. He said, "No, I mean, how do you pay your bills, your rent? How do you furnish your home?" I said, "I live in my heart. I keep it clean and its doors open for all to freely come and go." He laughed at me, so I cried for him, because he couldn't understand what I was saying. He thought I was upset, but I wasn't. It just happens that sometimes I cry when I'm praying. You see, I don't have much to offer you, my friends, except for everything I have. An open heart, a crooked smile, and a handful of paper planes. These words that pour forth from the palms of my hand, they are destined for short flights. So come, my love, take these paper planes I write. Let us for a moment imagine we can fly.
You're listening to Untangled, real and intimate stories from women and men who have chosen to look at and do life in a different way. I'm your host, Alana Helbig. Today I welcome the very first male guest on Untangled, spoken word artist and co-founder of Up Up Trampoline, Erfan Daliri. At the age of 28, Erfan finds himself living in his parents' garage. He is divorced, has sold everything he owns, and he's about to undertake a very conscious journey of untanglement. In this interview, Erfan and I explore the series of events that led him to this point in his life and how he navigated very dark periods of anxiety and depression. We look at Erfan's great fear of being alone and how he worked with and released this fear. We speak about why developing our emotional core strength is essential for navigating periods of difficulty, and also learning to turn inwards rather than looking outside of ourselves or to others for answers. Plus, so much more. Seriously, this is one of my most favourite discussions to date. Now, before I jump in, Erfan and I have a giveaway for you. The music and poetry that you heard at the start of this podcast is from Erfan's recently released album, Paper Planes, and Erfan has kindly donated 5 albums to the Untangled community. If you'd love to grab yourself a free copy of his work, just be one of the first 5 people to email me at alana@alanahelbig.com and I'll send you through a copy. And one last thing, we had a few sound issues with this recording, so if you are listening in, I recommend using headphones for better clarity of sound. Okay, let's jump in. So, Erfan, I'd love to begin with you telling us about your soul gifts and the work that you're doing in the world.
I guess my work has one particular through line, and that is to make the world a safer and kinder place in a overarching kind of sense. But more specifically, I've been led to a career as a spoken word artist, as a festival director and a workshop facilitator. So I guess what I do is creating experiences, whether it's an event that I perform at, or an event that I host, or a workshop that I run. So I guess the facilitation of experiences is how I serve, and it's all geared towards initiating agents of social change and bringing about greater awareness through articulation, I guess, or choreography. So if I'm speaking or performing, then it's my articulation. If it's an event, like a festival or a workshop, it comes down to the choreography and the holding of that particular space. So that's, I guess, how I serve. My soul gift, it's a strange one to answer, I guess. I think we all have the capacity to possess all of the gifts available. So we just, for one reason or another, through the variables of our life, choose particular paths. And mine happens to be that I'm comfortable speaking and holding space in front of, a group of 10 or 1,000. So I make of that particular avenue most.
I want to actually jump back and talk about your whole journey and your story, your personal story of untanglement and coming to discover these gifts. But I just feel called to ask you, where was it that you discovered that you were able to hold space? Because that's a very special thing to be able to do.
Yeah. I guess how I realized that I was particularly capable of holding space, it was more a process. It wasn't a particular event. I mean, I was always very comfortable with debating or public speaking, even in primary school. So it was never like all of a sudden a realization that struck me. I guess as I grew older and I became more aware of the fact that I'm more comfortable speaking to an audience than others, then I guess I continued to train that particular skill of mine. It wasn't an aha moment at all, really. It was just a slow and gradual process of realization.
Can you tell me about your journey, your personal journey of untanglement?
Sure, I can tell you. I can go right back to the start. I guess my parents were both Iranian refugees who happened to have met in India, and before I was even born, they were both engaged in community development and social change, I guess, and particularly through the arts. So when we arrived in Australia, and I was basically born into a family that was already working in social change and community development. So in a way, my entanglement wasn't like a massive difference to how I was living. There was a bit of confusion in there trying to balance this idea of serving the world and being an agent of social change and what society expected you to do. So I kind of juggled those two worlds where I studied engineering and I, did the usual things. I got married and got a house and all the rest of it. But all the time, I was still engaged in social change, in the arts, in youth work and community development work. I guess there was a point where juggling those two or trying to live between those two worlds just became too difficult. I guess something just snapped and I realized I don't want to be half of this and half of that. And I basically just left everything behind. I left my business, I left my marriage, I left my hometown, and wasn't quite sure where I was going to go or what I was going to do, but I did know that I wanted to be of service at every given moment in time. And yeah, I guess I slowly worked my way through that kind of maze until I got to a point where now there is no boundary between what I consider as my day life or my work or my service. It's all just my existence as a whole.
Can we go back to that time? Because I've actually had a couple of women email me just recently. They're in this period where they are still in work or in lives which they don't feel are right for them anymore, but for whatever reason, they still need to stay there for some time. And I'm just wondering, when you were in that phase of feeling that disjointedness between the current life that you had and where you're being called to go, what was that feeling like for you, and how did you work with the opposing feelings?
I guess that comes down to the limiting belief that is most common amongst all of humanity. I guess if you really boil it down, it all comes back down to fear. And I think that's our greatest block and our biggest limiting belief system. So for me, it could be anything. It could be fear of failure. It could be fear of rejection. It could be fear of judgment. It could be fear of anything. But it's that fear of that which is different is what holds us back. And for me, it was like, well, how am I going to support myself? How will I be judged? How will I will I regret this? Can I do this? Can I go through with this? So I guess fear is what holds us back from letting go of things that we're comfortable with or used to. Even though a situation might be painful, because it's what we're used to, it's often difficult to let go because everything else is unfamiliar. So letting go of what you're familiar with, even though it's not serving you, isn't actually very easy, because beyond that is something completely new that we have no experience of. And it's the fear of the unknown, the fear of the other, that oftentimes holds us back from achieving our fullest selves. So when I realized that, love and fear, both of those things dwell in the same space, which is the heart, I realized that the more fear I carry, the less room I actually have in that space to hold love. So I began actually directly addressing fears. And sometimes they're very tangible and physical, so you can notice them very easily. And other times they're much more subtle. So for me, I began addressing them wherever I could see, whether it was simply a fear of heights. I thought, okay, I'm terrified of heights, so I'm going to go and book myself in for a skydiving session, and I'm going to throw myself out of a plane. Things like that, like things that actually terrified me. I was afraid of needles as well, so I said, okay, I'm going to go in and book myself in for a blood sample, even though I don't necessarily need one, just so I could face those big things that loomed over me. And then the subtle ones, the emotional fears, the mental fears and blocks, become easier to address when the biggest, most obvious ones are directly looked at. Then smaller things are easier to address, and the subtle ones come to the surface. So if we're afraid of being silly, then we should go and be silly. Go and bust on the streets if you've never done that before, and you're afraid of what people might think of you. Then go do that. Go stand on the street corner and dance, because you'll realize that that thing you're afraid of was actually nothing to be afraid of at all. And that is what allows us to achieve our fullest capacity and become that which we have an intuition that we already are.
So what during that time was the greatest fear for you?
In an emotional, philosophical sense, I guess something that a lot of us also share is the feeling of being alone. And even though sometimes we are in large audiences or in long-term relationships, we still have the sense of feeling alone. But like absolute, eternal, infinite loneliness is something that I was greatly afraid of, and I was for the most part seeking relationships just so that I wouldn't have to be alone. So when I realized that a lot of the relationships that I'd entered, long or short, were as a result of my fear of being alone, I decided to remove myself from my current context at the time, and I moved to a cabin in the woods in Tasmania, where I would often go a week or 2 weeks without seeing another human being at all. I paid my rent up front for 6 months, and I just sat there without anything in particular to do. Waking up alone, eating alone, reading alone, going back to sleep alone, and just doing that day after day after day after day. And eventually, you get to a breakthrough point. And for me, it was about after a month. And then the idea of being alone indefinitely no longer terrified me as it used to. And once I was able to do that, then I was more comfortable in my skin. Then I was able to serve in a way that I hadn't been able to before. I wasn't seeking validation. I wasn't seeking reward. I wasn't serving out of any other fear, but the fact that I could, and it brought me joy. So I think being alone, being comfortable with being silent, being comfortable with the dark. These things that seem really simple, like going for a walk in dark woods. It honestly, truly does make a massive difference in our emotional and mental state when we're able to do that physical thing of walking through unfamiliar dark woods alone and be completely comfortable with it. It's spiritual connections and connotations. So I think by addressing physical fears, we open up a great number of spiritual doors.
So good. Yeah, I 100% agree. I travelled around Australia last year in my van and I spent most of the time on my own. And there were moments when I was walking in the dark and actually had to run back to my van because I was so terrified.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, but I just thought, what am I afraid of? If, Australia doesn't really have anything that's going to jump out at you in the dark and eat you.
And even if it does, when you have no fear of it, it's actually less dangerous. Whether it's a wild animal or another human being, when you're able to stand there and not jump or shriek or be terrified when something comes at you, you're actually much safer in that situation. You're able to think much more clearly and oftentimes navigate your way back towards safety. But having that fear kind of like narrows our spectrum of vision and reduces our mental capacity so that we actually are in more danger when we're afraid. But walking without fear through a dark alleyway, you're actually much safer.
And I feel like this, we could flip this and you could look at it from the philosophical point of view as well, that's exactly the same, when we're going through those periods of darkness in our life. It's the fear that gets us stuck there, really. But if we can just lean into it. Yeah.
That's it. Lean into it, hold your ground, lower your center of gravity, your emotional center of gravity. Then you'll actually be, much happier and much safer physically and emotionally. So a big part of what I do and continue to work on and to provide for others is, a chance to develop our emotional core strength. So we know about physical core strength and the abs and all the rest of it, but emotionally as well, I find that, I certainly, and a great deal of people that I've noticed, we lack, for the most part, our emotional core strength. So we actually put off center and off kilter very easily. Develop our emotional core strength, then, darkness, uncertainty, all these sorts of things, they don't affect us as much, and we can actually walk through the darkness or difficult times with a great deal more composure, and integrity. And that is quite possibly one of the most inspiring things for others to witness.
Yes. Yeah. Why do you think it's so prevalent that we don't have emotional core strength?
I don't think we were taught it. I think as a civilization, we're still learning about it. It's part of the human evolution, I guess. We, started off in caves and fighting and hunting and just surviving day to day. And I think after all these thousands and thousands of years, we've gotten to a point where we're able to develop much finer, nuanced skills and faculties. And the ability to not be fazed by emotional hardship is now the next frontier. So I think it's just part of our evolution. We've been in the past been very easily drawn into conflict or revenge, resentment, and self-preservation, and that's part of the animal nature of the human being. And I think after all this time, we're finally able to begin developing and witnessing the spiritual nature of the human being. So I think when people often say, "Oh, that's just human nature," I think what they're actually referring to is the animal nature, the instinctive self-preservation and protection of the self at all costs, which is, of course, a part of the human composition, but it's not necessarily human nature. It's the animal nature within the human being. And by referring to things as simply human nature, we are ignoring the fact that the human being also has a spiritual nature. And I think we're at the precipice now where, we are able to finally look over and realize, okay, so we can now develop our spiritual nature with intention and much more consciously than we have, because we don't need to now think about immediate safety.
Yeah, I agree. I'm wondering if you can tell me about that period of darkness and what kinds of things you did to navigate through that.
I fumbled my way through that. to be honest. I stumbled and fumbled and was pretty clueless in that period. And to make it more clear and specific, the period I'm referring to is when I got married. I was very young. I was 23 years old, and I was always under the impression that, any two human beings can make things work, and you don't need to really spend a great deal of time getting to know someone. I was, I guess, naive. I hadn't really found myself, and neither had my partner at the time. So very quickly we got married, and the moment we did, my nervousness and anxiety kicked in, and the realization that I was solidifying myself in a life that I'd never really believed in, which was running a business and doing your regular 9 to 5 and coming home to watch TV and eat dinner. As I realized I was getting ingrained in that, the terror set in, and the next 4 years of my life were quite frightening. And life became darker and darker, and possibilities became smaller and smaller. And I found myself dealing with a great deal of depression, anxiety, and panic attacks that would set in every time I stopped working for a minute, to a point where I became a very unhappy human being, and not a very kind person either to myself or to those around me. And I guess the climax of towards the end of that period, the attempt to take my own life was one of the major points which kind of shifted everything. And how close it actually was to that happening, and the sheer fluke of circumstances that deterred that, changed a lot of things for me. And not long after that, I realized that the only thing more terrifying than leaving the situation is actually staying in the situation. So the fears that used to cloud my mind, which was how would I be judged, how will I survive, what will I do, what will my parents think, and what will society think of me, that all of a sudden kind of fell away, and the fear of remaining in that life for the rest of my time here became greater, and that kind of pushed me out into the unknown space of being, in my late 20s, divorced, sold my business, sold all my furniture, and living back at my parents' garage at the age of 28. And that's where a lot of the conscious journey began, where I was much more aware of myself, my surroundings, and the mistakes that I didn't want to make in the past. And from that, everything I did was intentional and trying to find my way back home, I guess, in a way.
And by back home, you mean back to the truth of who you really are?
Yeah, exactly. Back to the truth of who I really am, which I think is an infinite and eternal journey. And the fear that had sunk in at that point was the fear of no longer moving towards that, becoming solidified in a way of being, and having ended that journey prematurely. Now I realize that the becoming of what I am at the essence is actually a never-ending journey. There is no point at which we can say, I'm now enlightened. I don't believe in it. Or I'm now awakened, or I've now addressed everything that I need to address, and I have no work left to do. I think it's a very dangerous thought to arrive at. And I hold the belief that that's possibly when anxiety again sets in, is when we think we've done the work and we can now stop and rest. My idea of anxiety is that it's basically intuition that's been ignored, and it becomes angry and it starts kicking. And it's basically the soul telling the body that, hey, you've got to move from this particular job or this relationship or the situation you're in. And I think that's what anxiety really is. It's the soul telling the body, in a very terrifying way, that, hey, you need to get a move on. And for that reason, I continue to look for blind spots, for areas that I can develop myself, and allow the others around me to develop themselves as well.
Yeah, I can really resonate with that. I yeah, I've been through the depression and the anxiety as well. And that's the realization that I've come to as well, that stuff only comes up when I'm ignoring my soul.
Yeah.
Can you talk about that period of moving from your old life then into your new life? Because I know there's a lot of women listening who are in that. I read an article once where a woman described it as in between stories. That old life is done, but the new life hasn't presented itself. And how did you move towards that new life when you perhaps weren't certain what that was going to be and look like?
Again, with the idea that it's a process and it doesn't actually end. I don't think for me, it hasn't been a matter of moving from one story into another. So it was just continuing a story and overcoming a particular plot twist and continuing on. I can't say how I arrived here because I don't think I've arrived anywhere. But I guess to answer your question, I could say that the first few years of that time were testing, and certainly there was times when I questioned myself and not knowing exactly if I was doing what was right. But what I did know was that I needed to learn from what I had previously done and not done. So I guess one of the first things I did was everything I wasn't doing at the time, I started doing, and everything I was doing, I stopped doing. So I just shifted things around at that time. I'd never, I'd been a meat eater my entire life, for example. So I decided, okay, I'm going to become vegetarian. I'd never drunk alcohol before up until that point. So I thought, I'm going to start drinking alcohol. I just flipped everything upside down. And then eventually I came to a point of balance and realization, and the drinking stopped again a while back because I was aware of what it was doing for me. The vegetarianism stayed because I was aware of what I was doing for myself. So, changing habits was a big part of that process, and patterns. So I'm like, okay, so what I've done so far has gotten me here. So let me have a look at what I've done so far and those particular habits and characteristics and personality traits that have led me here, and let me one by one look at those things, and see which ones I can address. It's like, just trying to fix a vehicle that's broken down. You have to admit that you've broken down to begin with. And in a way I had. And then you can start looking, okay, so was it the gearbox? Was it the steering wheel? Was it the engine? Which part or parts rather, do I need to now address? So it was a process of gradual, shifting and tightening and changing of different characteristic traits. And as I said, I don't think that ever actually ends. In any given moment, I can name half a dozen things that I'd like to address right now. Just a continual journey, and fearlessness is a big part of it. I guess I was lucky in that I wasn't ever truly unsupported. I mean, even though those around me didn't have the capacity to actually do anything for me, they couldn't really help me in my uncertainty or darkness. Just the fact that I was loved and encouraged was enough for me. So in that sense, I consider myself very lucky. So at the end of the day, whether you have that support network or not, the fact that no other individual can save you or is responsible for you, or has an answer for you, I think is a key element in that. And that again, connects back to fearlessness, and not relying on anyone else to give you an answer or a formula or a solution. When we can take that on, as fact and say, okay, it's up to me at the end of the day, as much as I'm loved or supported, no one can actually save me. It's my responsibility. And that is something I constantly remind myself of.
Yeah, I love that, because there's kind of a tendency, I feel it definitely was for me anyway. There was a tendency when I was feeling so lost and I was on that journey of trying to go, okay, where am I going to next? That just didn't work for me anymore. That I started to just look outside of myself rather than turn inwards.
Yeah, exactly. I think that was one of the key things that I learned, was that one of those major things that I needed to address was the fact that I'd always look to others, whether it was scriptures or leaders or family members. I'd always look to others to find answers, and as a child and as a teenager. So that was one of the big realizations, was that there actually isn't any individual or any system or easy solution. It's personal responsibility and owning your story and owning your existence. And you know, I guess I tried a whole bunch of different things like that I'd never actually tried before, just trying to, you know, work out where the answer lies and who is it with. You know, I became connected to the conscious community in Byron Bay. I started wearing crystals and doing all sorts of things. And, you know, I quickly find that, this is also hollow, and this is also hollow, and this is also hollow. And very soon I realized, okay, so there is no quick fix. There is a great deal of hard work to be done as an individual, and just joining any particular group or political stand or community isn't going to save us. The work is very, very, very personal, and it's very internal, and it's at the core of us. You know, developing our virtues and our characteristics as human beings, and becoming kinder, more noble, more gentle, more generous. Those things. That's where the answers lie, and that's not something that anyone else can do for you. So regardless of your system or faith or belief, I think it all comes back down to very core aspects of the human condition, which is the virtues and developing those virtues.
When did you realize that that's actually what you needed to do? How did you come to that realization?
How I came to that realization, I guess, was when I left that period of darkness and I started trying all the different things, like, and joining different groups and following different leaders of communities, and being very aware, like because of what I've been through in the past, I didn't want to blindly follow anything anymore, because I've done that before. So being aware while being led, you can actually notice when you're straying off path again very quickly. And that allows me to, I guess, dip my toes into many different fields and schools of thought and ways of being. So I learned very quickly by doing that. Whereas if I hadn't been aware and I'd simply blindly followed someone else, then it would have taken, you know, a much longer time before I'd gotten to a position where I was so uncomfortable that I had to change again. But by being aware that, okay, I'm going to, you know, trust this person's intuition or advice or guidance. If you're aware of where you're going, you'll very quickly realize, okay, that doesn't feel quite right. And if you listen to that intuition, you get to experience, a wide, variety of experiences very quickly and learn much faster.
What does it feel like, maybe even in your body or wherever you feel it, when it's not, like something isn't right, when your intuition is saying this isn't for me?
I don't know if I feel it in a particular part of my body at all. It's almost like it's just my consciousness just says there's something awry here. You've got your gut instinct, and you just feel something in your gut sometimes, or sometimes it's a heady thing. I don't think it's, for me, it's localized in a particular spot. It's just awareness. It's just common sense. I guess it's just my mind, perhaps. And I've been known to spend a great deal of time in my head, so I work things out. So everything comes down to equations and systems, and so yeah, for me, it's just very different to others, I guess. But yeah, it's just head, clarity of thought. I think is very important, which is a big part of my existence right now, is to not lull or dull myself in any way. So I steer clear of anything that alters my state of mind and clouds my judgment. And my goal is to constantly be on point and to be ever present and ever aware of every situation, so that I can save myself and others time and energy and avoid pain and suffering by just making decisions very quickly.
What's your process or ritual for tuning into that connection with yourself, your soul?
I mean, I do have a daily, I guess, a ritual. I guess I do meditate and pray on a daily basis and acknowledge a larger consciousness, but that's not necessarily a process of tuning in. That's more like, I guess, like just connecting back to source and acknowledging the witness of all. I do that generally of an evening. It feels better when I do it in the mornings because my mornings are so hectic and I often have to rush to work. I end up doing it in the evening. But that's not necessarily for tuning into myself. I like to believe that I maintain that state of being the entire day. And I don't need to tune in to work out a solution or come up with an answer. So if someone asks me or invites me somewhere or asks something of me, I'd like to believe that I am in any given moment at all times always tuned in. I don't need to go through any particular ritual or process to drop into myself again. I like to believe I'm always there, and by that way, I'm always in a state of prayer. I'm always aware of the beliefs that I have accumulated, which is the fact that there is only one being alive, and that we're just looking at our own self by looking at each other. So when those types of beliefs like really drop in, that really sink in, the fact that there is no other, there is no evil, there is only one soul split up into billions of different bodies. When that really drops, when that penny finally falls, I don't need to drop into that space again. I'm always there. So in every given moment when I'm looking at another person or in another situation, I don't necessarily need to remind myself about things that I've learned because I really understood it and I've really accepted it. And I'd like to hope that is a state that we can all arrive at where we are so clear of thought and so aware and believe and understand these spiritual concepts so deeply that it just becomes ingrained in our very way of being, in our atoms, such that we don't need to reflect and consider and drop in to make good decisions, and that we can make good decisions all the time, because that idea that we are one interconnected, inseparable being just becomes a part of the fabric of your belief system.
While you've been talking this whole time, what's been coming up for me is how unusual it is to really speak with a man who has these perspectives and can speak at this level. And maybe that's just because of the circles that I move in or that I spend a lot of time with women. But I'm wondering how that is for you in your own life, that you are this way. And let's be honest, the majority of men aren't. How does that work for you? Is that comfortable for you?
I don't know, that makes me feel really weird. I don't know if I'm comfortable in that space, but then again, I don't know if I'm comfortable differentiating between myself and most men either. Like, to say I'm different, it would allow ego to creep in and for me to become complacent. So I don't ever want to actually really allow that belief to fall in. And for me, I'm slightly more aware or enlightened than anyone else. So it's a funny question to hear. I don't really know how to answer that.
I guess what I'm asking is there Yeah, how do I frame it? Is there, and I'm looking at it from the perspective of, I'll give you the reason why I've asked it, and then that might help you answer it. A lot of the women who listen, they go through this period where they move into more of an aware state, and then they find that the people around them are, they're not gelling with the people around them anymore, and there's this level of discomfort. And so I guess the reason why I'm asking you is the same. Like, is there a level of discomfort, and how do you ease that?
I think if I was to be honest, the people who are around me or who have been around me at any point in my life have been a reflection of my state of being. And it's not instantaneous. It's not like I change my belief system or my way of being, and the very next day my entire friends and family changes. I think we have to allow the universe the time it requires in order for it to shift around our state of being. But if I was to be honest, definitely, whatever state I've been in, the people who I've gathered around me have reflected that mental state, because, I mean, we're emitting a certain frequency, if you will, and certain behaviors and patterns, everything down to very basic things like where you hang out on weekends. It influences those who are in your circle. So for me, this process of growth and self-awareness and realization has been interconnected with change in my surroundings and the people in my circles and those who I call friends. So I actually don't feel like I'm completely isolated or alone in my way of life. I can recognize that as I develop myself and my soul and become more aware and more active and more engaged, then those around me automatically shift and either change themselves or they fall out of my circle. So when I look around and I see the people that I have in my life, I get this massive rush of joy to think that I have developed myself to such an extent that I deserve to have such incredible beings around me. So men and women, in the same proportions around me at this particular point in life. For me to believe that they are a reflection of my internal state of being brings me a great deal of joy. I'm like, wow, I've actually become such a kind and considerate and generous human being that I deserve to have people like this around me. So I don't ever feel like I'm isolated or alone in where I am, because I can recognize that the universe takes time to readjust to our state of being. So when I come to a new realization or a new shift or a new point in my life, then I'm like, okay, if that's not immediately reflected in my friends and family, I recognize that it will come about, and I've seen it time and again happen.
Yeah, that's a great perspective. Thank you so much, Erfan. That's just been so enlightening. I just want to ask you a couple more questions, if that's okay. I'm
having a great time, so you can continue for as long as you like.
Oh, awesome. Cool. So obviously this series, you're the first man that I've had on this series. So, and I often ask my guests, or it is alluded in the conversation anyway, we talk a lot about how women are bringing their gifts and are working together to bring healing to the world in their own way of showing up. And I'd love to get your perspective on the role you believe men play in that process.
I guess to begin the answer to that question, I'd have to go back to my definition or understanding of the soul. And I honestly do not believe that the soul has a gender. So the soul, I believe, is a consciousness that animates this particular form that I am in. But when that consciousness is no longer connected to this body, it has no race, it has no gender, it is neither old nor young, nor any of those characteristics. So I think I don't want to place too much difference on what men should do and what women should do, because I think at the core, we are souls, and the less we identify with our story and our physical characteristics and physical structure, and the more we reflect on our spiritual nature, the sooner we will arrive at solutions and answers. So if we're talking about how can we heal the world, or how can we arrive at a place where this world is safe and gentle and kind, I wouldn't want to differentiate between what role men should play and what role women should play. I think finding a point where we are balanced in masculine and feminine energy is really important. We too strongly identify with particular traits. I think that's where the root cause of all of our issues lies, is the fact that we become so ingrained in particular traits. And some people have issue with me saying this, but it's obvious that there are certain traits that men more easily embody than women, and certain traits women more easily embody than men. And that's, I don't know how that's come about. We're just born into it, and it's cultural training, I guess. But I think part of the process of healing is to, regardless of the physical form you're in, is to be able to recognize, identify, and embody the full spectrum of human characteristics and virtues. Men would probably find it difficult to understand this, but I honestly believe women are able to forgive much easier than men. Women are less likely to send their sons off to war because they gave birth to those things. So it's very easy to identify certain characteristics and traits that certain genders have. But in order to arrive at a state where we are balanced and whole, complete as individuals and as a civilization, I think it's important for both, well, not even both genders. I think it's important for human beings to recognize the full spectrum of what it means to be a soul, rather than what it means to be a man or a woman or anything else in between those two things or beyond those two things. So development of virtues of all sorts is, I think, what's most important. And with that comes everything from honesty and truthfulness and integrity and honor and kindness and gentleness. And if we can just embody these characteristics regardless of our particular gender, I think we'll arrive at home much sooner. If you were to ask me what is the most critical point in this journey and what area should be given the most attention, it genuinely just boils down to the education and training of children. If you're in the world and you think, well, why are men like this or that? Why do we have such misogynistic men in power? Why is there so much sexism? Why is there so much violence, domestic violence or whatever, or any other form of violence? I think we have to remind ourselves that all of these men, women, were at one point children. And if a man has grown up and he is condescending, misogynistic, sexist, disrespectful, well, that man was once a 5-year-old who had a mother and a father, and that man was once a 10-year-old and a 12-year-old, and it was the training that person received, or the attention rather that they received or did not receive, that has caused them to be the way they are. And I think if we are able to give our children the presence and attention that they deserve, they will grow up to be much more noble and kind and gentle human beings. The pace of life makes it difficult at times, and nothing breaks my heart the way when I see a child being scolded in public, or an adult who dismisses a child's question, or thinks that their life or their work or their career or paying off bills is any more important than flying kites. I think if we stop trying to fix the world or change the world and simply gave our children the attention and awareness and patience and presence that they deserve, that would in itself be the quickest way to arrive at a solution, to arrive at a state of peacefulness.
Thanks, Erfan.
Not a problem.
What do you feel is the most important thing you'd like the women listening in today to take away from your conversation?
The most important thing, wow, I don't know. I guess every person will take a different thing out. If I was to say what I think is the most important thing, that might not be what is most valuable to someone else. And that's the tricky thing with language. Like I can say any particular word and in every listener's mind, a different image or concept is conjured up. So I can't tell what is the most valuable lesson for someone to take because we're all at such different points in our journey. All I can speak about is what's been the most valuable aspect of my journey, the most valuable learning, I guess, and what I think is crucial. And it comes down to fearlessness and just emotional composure and integrity and not shying away from anything that's intimidating to you. Do not back down, whether it's an emotional struggle, whether if it's a person, situation. Do not back down. Hold your ground and stare whatever it is that scares you or terrifies you. Stare it in the face and address it. Do not be apologetic. Do not appease others around you, men, women, or anyone else, whether it's in the workplace or on public transport. I think there's a great deal of learning to be had for men, and in order for that to happen, I would like women to stand their ground and bring it to their attention. And as shaking as that might be, as scary as that might be sometimes in the context when it's the workplace and you're surrounded by men, or on public transport when a man is being particularly disrespectful or just unaware sometimes, just bring it to their attention in as kind and gentle way as you possibly can, because oftentimes they're not even aware of it. So don't put up with shit, basically. And don't back down. Hold your ground.
Don't put up with shit. That's actually a really important thing for me to take away from this conversation.
Totally. So yeah, not putting up with stuff that's uncomfortable, and not backing away from anything that scares you. That is the fastest way home. Is addressing our fears allows us to come into contact with that which we love, and overcoming our greatest fears will allow us to move closer towards our greatest love. So yeah, be fearless and know that there is no divide, there is no side, there is no team to pick. We're all in this together, and at the end of the day, we share, I believe, a single consciousness, a single soul. We just happen to be split up into different bodies at this point in time. But there are no winners or losers in this thing. Something that really is ever present in my mind is that the greatest health risk to women in the world is men. And the greatest risk to men in this world is also men. So we're all in the shit together. The sheer number of men that are committing suicide tells you that they're all suffering as well. And though they might be acting out physically and harming others physically, the spiritual and emotional pain that they're going through, it exists and it's very real. And the fact that we lose so many soldiers who have come back from conflict. We lose more soldiers to suicide than we do in conflict. That's a common trend across a great deal of nations. And it's painful to both sides. And I think when we remove that idea of side and realize that we're in this together and the grief we're feeling is a collective grief, then we'll feel much kinder towards each other, and be able to work with one another in a much more effective and efficient way.
Thank you so much. This has been so good.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure. It's been good fun.
It's been really, really fun. I also asked you to bring along a soul gift offering.
You did?
Yeah. Did you want to share that with us now?
Sure. Yeah. I have a spoken word piece that I wrote at a recent masterclass that I facilitated. And yeah, I had this moment where I went up into the woods and I danced under the stars alone in the middle of the night, which is something I hadn't done in a very long time. And as I got back to my cabin, this particular piece of writing came to me, and it wasn't really me writing to anyone or anyone else writing to me. It was more like just an address to humanity, to individuals, to everyone. So yeah, and just as I was writing it, I actually broke down because I didn't realize what I was writing until after it had been written. So it's one of those pieces. So I'm gonna read it out for you. Now it's not a piece I've memorized, but I'll read it for you now. I saw you that night. You danced with a broken heart. I saw you dancing under the stars. I saw you move your limbs in my praise. I saw you forgiving the past. I saw you stamp the ground with the print of your foot to tell the earth you were there and of how strong you stood. I saw you dance with tears streaming down your face. I saw you even when you thought it was too dark to be witnessed. For it is in the darkest night when your light shines most vivid. I saw you all those nights you fell asleep at your desk, and those nights you would crawl underneath it to get some rest. I saw you as you paced empty streets at night, trying to think of the solution. I saw you as you wailed in your prayers, then sat still, just to listen. I'm sorry I had to whisper. That's just the way the story was written. I saw you commit yourself to the task at hand. I saw you unquestioningly give everything you had and everything you'd hoped. All you ever wanted was children of your own, but I wanted to teach you how to love the whole world. And though you hardly ever got what you wanted, I saw you smiling even when you were hurting. You never offered a fake smile. It always read true. It said, I'm bleeding, but I still love you. I'm bleeding, but I'm still breathing. I'm struggling to breathe, but I will still serve you however I can. I saw you forgive that man without making a sound. I saw you hold yourself together as the world fell apart all around. In all the confusion, I still saw you. I saw you love even when you felt unloved. I saw you give even when you were out of breath. I saw you sleeping on floors and in cars just to make things work. I'm sorry your marriage didn't, but you had a whole world to serve. I saw you hold your peace even when you were in pain. I saw you sitting perfectly still every time love set you aflame. I saw the work you did in the shadows and in the dark. I saw you traveling the world with your son by your side. I saw you even when you thought you were hiding. I knew how little money you had left, and I saw how little you cared, and it made me smile. If only you could have heard me applauding you, my love. If only you could have heard me laugh. Every time I made life more difficult, you just worked harder. I saw you as you went planting seeds in forgotten gardens. I saw you holding your breath until you were alone to let out your sadness. I saw how you took other people's grief off their hands. I saw you skip meals and simple pleasures for the sake of your fellow man, and that is why I sent you my angel. I saw how you loved, even when it was painful, and for that, above all else, I am thankful. I saw how you loved, even when it was painful, and for that, above all else, I am thankful. I look forward to witnessing you in the next world, and the one hereafter, and all the ones I have not yet crafted. And if you ever need me, know that I am only ever as far away as half a breath.
Thank you so much for listening. I love having deep and honest and real conversations with men and women who are choosing to look at and do life in a different way. I believe this is how our world starts to change, through the honest sharing of our stories. If you love these conversations too, I would really be so grateful if you could take a couple of moments to rate and review this podcast. It helps Untangled to reach more men and women who need these stories. You can do it right here from the podcast app on your phone. Just click on the review tab and let me know what you think. And you can also subscribe to this podcast while you're there so you never miss any future episodes. I'm so grateful for your presence here. Thank you.